I first heard this song as a child watching info commercials in which there were images of women and children in abject poverty in countries from all around the world. It was ironic because the more I watched these commercials, the more disconnected I felt. And so I've carried this song with me from country to village to experience as a reminder of my responsibility to stay connected. I had the amazing opportunity of spending over a decade living and working in rural India, where I felt as though I was being transported into a different time and space, where every single day, for over half a day, women and children seek water sources kilometers away from their homes and carry them back for their families, not just once, but often 3 to 4 times a day. Where communities depend on the light of day because they still do not have access to electricity. On my journey, I had the opportunity of meeting my partner and creating India as my new home. Despite the threats of malaria, tuberculosis, nepotism, I always knew and felt that I was invincible. But that changed. And it changed the moment that I became pregnant. The moment that I was cognizant of a life growing inside me. And at that moment, I made a decision that at the end of my pregnancy, I would return home to Canada, where I felt safer in a more familiar healthcare system to birth our baby. Ladies and gentlemen, at 31 years old, and 3 days after giving birth to our son, and after 6 horrendous seizures, I was placed in semi-induced coma to prevent brain damage. CAT scans revealed that I had 3 blood clots in my brain, and I'd suffered a stroke of 4.5 centimeters long in my parietal lobe. The medical community was beyond shocked. They had all overlooked my symptoms. What I had experienced was so rare. Cerebral venous thrombosis only happens to 7 in 1 million individuals, and I was one of them. The community now responded. They responded by being attentive to all of my needs. Locally and regionally, a medical community mobilized around me in protection. They even went as far as to pump my breasts while I lay unconscious so that our baby would have milk generated from my body. As I began to regain consciousness, as I lay in the intensive care unit, the only thing that I could think of were the women and the children that I was serving in rural India, and the lack of health care that they would have received, and the fact that they wouldn't have received a fraction of the care that I had just received. Where hemorrhaging and blood clots during and after childbirth lead to countless mortalities. And as the social systems of the country that I was working in now began to haunt me, I thought of some of the women that I'd worked closely with. I thought of Satyapal. Satyapal was a woman who lived in a nearby community where we were doing income generation projects. When I heard that Satyapal had given birth, I traveled immediately to the community to see how mother and baby were doing, because I want to paint a picture for you here. In rural India, one auxiliary nurse midwife is responsible for 1,000 patients spread out in a diverse topographical area. That could be having to commute through forests or hillocks or even desert. So the ability of one nurse to be able to reach all of those patients is not very fruitful, and often that care is inconsistent and unreliable. The next point of care for women are primary healthcare clinics that are set up as basic resources with very limited stock and facilitated often by unqualified medical personnel. The best source or resource medically for these communities are hospitals. These hospitals, these government hospitals, are located kilometers away, where without roads or even public transportation, mothers have to walk 10 to 15 kilometers to access this care. Again, through diverse topographical areas in unbearable conditions. Satyapal Bai, when I met her, and in this picture you'll see, she was bundling up her baby. What I learned was that Satyapalji's Baiji's baby was actually experiencing vomiting and diarrhea for the last 3 to 4 days, and she was no longer breastfeeding. Satyapal was bundling up her baby to make the journey of 5 kilometers to the nearest road where she would hitchhike further to the government hospital, her last hope. We immediately vacated our vehicle and put her in it. After 3 to 4 days, Satyapal and her baby were discharged from the hospital without a diagnosis or a care plan. After 2 months, in her maternal grandparents' village, Satyapal's baby died. In the world's largest democracy, no one was accountable to Satyapal or her baby. The next person I want to introduce you to is someone whose name I will never know. I was visiting a friend in a government hospital who had just given birth. Government hospitals in India provide subsidized care for marginalized populations, populations that were marginalized because they belonged to the lowest rungs of a caste system that I was told repetitively that did not exist. However, a caste system that created a hierarchical structure persists to compromise the lives of individuals and communities as a whole, economically, socially, and politically. When I went to the hospital, this young woman was laying beside my friend. They were roommates in a room, and they were both recovering from cesareans, from C-sections. This woman was extremely quiet. She was huddled over to the side. I could not see her face. But when the doctor came in, he approached my friend first, and with great enthusiasm, congratulated on her brand new baby, checked her catheter to make sure everything was okay, and wrote her prescription. In the minute that it took for him to glance the other way, his demeanor changed completely. And in one swift motion, he walked from one patient to another, and he grabbed the bottom of the patient's skirt, and the patient was wearing a dress, a traditional dress with traditional jewelry, which I recognized her to be a tribal woman of a lower caste. He lifted up her dress and he ripped it over her head. Naked and exposed, he wrote a prescription and he threw it on top of her. In the same instant, he removed himself from the room, saying nothing. A nurse came in shortly thereafter. She looked at my friend and she congratulated her on her baby and gave her a baby dress. She walked over to the woman of lower caste and threw the baby dress again on her naked and exposed body. I immediately rushed over to put her dress back so she could regain an ounce of the dignity that she had just lost. As I was so close to her now, I could see that she was huddled over to the side because she was not sleeping, but she was holding her baby underneath her, as if she was shielding her baby from the discrimination that she had now just inherited from being born into a lower caste and to being informed by a society that created such a baseless distinction. I want to introduce you to Meena. I first met Meena when Meena was graduating from 10th grade in her village. Meena had great aspirations of becoming a teacher. And once a teacher in a government school told me that it's more important to actually educate a girl child than it is a boy child, because a girl can then educate 2 homes, the home that she was born into, as well as a home that she would be married into. But unfortunately, in rural India, many girls are set to be married at a young age. Many girls, often younger than Meena. Meena was to be given away in a traditional dowry. And I watched as her father was inconsolable as he laid the items of a kitchen and a household on the field in front of their home. as most fathers living in poverty in rural India, he had concern for his daughter's welfare. And his ability to secure her hand in marriage meant that he could secure her livelihood. In this instance, the dowry that he was putting together was to prove the value of his daughter, not to equate it. After a year of being married, Meena was unable to conceive a child. I was called by both her in-laws and her parents, and they asked me if I would come and take Meena to a hospital in the city. And so when I went to get Meena and her husband, and we traveled into the city, we first went to a gynecologist who quickly referred us to a tuberculosis clinic. What we found out that day was that Meena was suffering from tuberculosis, not now, but she actually had tuberculosis from a young age. And because that tuberculosis was not properly treated because of the lack of access to primary health care, Meena's tuberculosis spread, and her tuberculosis had spread to her genitalia, leaving her with a 1% chance of ever conceiving. Like many women in India, and especially in rural India, in rural poor India, the role of a young bride is wrapped into the role of becoming a mother. And I was so fearful then, and I'm fearful now, that because she was no longer fertile, would that mean that she was no longer valuable? Every one of the stories of the women that I could think of as I was lying there took me back to realizing that there are so many social determinants of health that were leading to high rates of infant and maternal mortality in rural India. And that there was something that could be done about these situations. And as I reflected on my own experience of not receiving care at the right moment, I was no longer willing to watch a woman in such a vulnerable state be left to her own vices. And the moment that I was able to travel, I packed my bags and I returned to India to start a foundation. Our focus would be to empower women to respond to their reality. We're specifically focusing on education through challenging societal norms that perpetuate gender bias, caste discrimination, and marginalization due to one's socioeconomic position. We most recently filmed a documentary, and we are taking this documentary into circles and spaces where we are challenging these biases and challenging these societal norms and beginning dialogue and dispelling misconceptions. We also understand that because there are so many barriers to accessing primary health care, women are not even attending to pre- and postnatal care for themselves. They are not even often going to hospitals but birthing in their own home communities to escape discrimination. Instead, we are working to provide an opportunity for women to have health and wellness education within their communities. Right now, we're taking medical doctors and medical students into communities to engage with communities where they're most comfortable, where they can learn the tools that they need to prevent any high risks. During that process, we're also ensuring that we are facilitating a process of ensuring compassion between providers as well as between community members. Empowerment. Right now, women in India are responding to the labor shortage in their own communities by providing for the food security of their own families while they're pregnant or when they're just after delivery. Women are responsible to tend to all of the needs of the entire family. They carry that burden alone. Through empowerment initiatives, we are working to provide skills training to women and employment opportunities within their own communities so that they can earn and ensure the health and wellness of their families. I always wanted to change the world, but the world changed me. As I was searching for opportunities to get connected, what I learned from working in rural communities around the world is that we are all inherently connected. They taught me age-old wisdoms about how frugality and sharing leads to sustainability. Lessons that require great sacrifice. I ask you all just to think for a moment. While we leisurely water our lawns, there are communities across the world who live in drought. The produce that sits in our grocery stores has often threatened the food security of the community that it has come from. Homelessness exists in our communities here and now. In every single corner of the world, some live in privilege and some do not. While we are all connected, we are not. Right now, many women alone carry the burden and honor of bearing a child. Unsupported, women from rural India, so petrified of giving birth to a girl child, are abandoning their baby girls in gutters on their way home from the hospital. In our so-called developed world, women are hiding out in toilet stalls to breastfeed their babies. And while we all understand that it takes a village to raise a child, women are being left alone postpartum. I know that I survived because my community responded. And so today I ask every one of you to respond. Respond by embracing your role as local and global citizens. Embrace your responsibility to the community in front of you and the community that you are dependent on that may be miles away from you. I ask you to respond by informing your life with the needs of the world. And I ask you to respond by allowing the world to change you. We only have each other. Thank you.